Los Angeles woke to a nightmare that no one saw coming. What began as a flicker of flame in a remote canyon quickly erupted into an unstoppable inferno, engulfing vast swaths of the city. The Pacific Palisades Fire, now infamous as one of the most devastating wildfires in California's history, consumed everything in its path: homes, lives, and the very spirit of communities that had stood strong for generations. As the flames tore through the hillsides, tens of thousands of residents found themselves caught in a race against time. The fire didn't wait, it moved with terrifying speed, propelled by the relentless Santa Ana winds that turned every ember into a fresh disaster. People scrambled to evacuate in the dead of night, hastily packing essentials, cramming pets into cars, and fleeing the only homes they had ever known. For many, there was no time to think, only to run. The scene was apocalyptic. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to smoldering ruins. Rows of homes that once teemed with life now stood as blackened skeletons against a crimson sky. The horizon glowed ominously, the flames reflecting off the choking clouds of smoke that blanketed the city. As fire engines raced toward the epicenter of the blaze, their sirens were drowned out by the roaring firestorm, a force of nature so powerful it seemed unstoppable. "We tried to stay as long as we could," said Maria Chavez, a resident of the Brentwood area who had lived in her home for over 2 decades. "But when the fire reached the ridge behind our house, we knew it was time to leave. It's like watching everything you've built in your life disappear in an instant." The human toll was staggering. Families separated in the chaos. Pets left behind in locked homes. Precious memories, photo albums, heirlooms, even wedding dresses, destroyed in the blink of an eye. More than 16,000 people were forced to evacuate, joining an ever-growing number of displaced residents in emergency shelters. The emotional weight of their losses was compounded by uncertainty. Many had no idea if they would ever be able to return to their homes, or if those homes even still existed. The fire's intensity was only matched by its unpredictability. The notorious Santa Ana winds, capable of gusting at over 50 miles per hour, turned the fire into a monster that could not be contained. The winds carried embers miles ahead of the fire line, igniting new blazes in densely populated areas. Firefighters, working around the clock, found themselves spread thin, battling flames on multiple fronts. Aerial firefighting teams dropped water and fire retardant, but it felt like pouring a glass of water on an erupting volcano. "This is unlike anything we've ever seen before," said Captain James Rivers of the Los Angeles Fire Department. "This fire isn't just moving, it's creating its own weather. The heat and the winds are forming fire tornadoes, making it nearly impossible to predict its path. Every plan we make gets thrown out the window as soon as the wind changes." For 5 harrowing nights, the city burned. Each night brought new horrors. Once safe neighborhoods turned into ghost towns, families huddling in shelters with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and exhausted firefighters pushing their bodies to the limit as they tried to hold the line. Yet, the fire showed no signs of slowing. Officials feared it could spread to even more densely populated areas of Los Angeles County, where millions of lives hung in the balance. "I don't think we're out of the woods yet," warned Los Angeles Mayor Evelyn Grant in a press briefing. "This is the most destructive fire in our city's history, and with the winds expected to pick up again, we have to prepare for the possibility that things could get worse before they get better." Amidst the chaos, the human spirit refused to be extinguished. Volunteers flooded evacuation centers with donations of food, clothing, and blankets. Communities banded together, offering shelter to strangers and raising funds for displaced families. And yet, for many, the weight of their loss was overwhelming. "I just kept hoping it wouldn't reach our house," said Michael Young, a father of 3 who had evacuated from Mandeville Canyon. "But when I saw the news this morning and recognized the street, our street, I knew it was gone. All of it. Our kids' toys, the pictures of their first steps, my wife's grandmother's piano, it's all gone." The fire had not only destroyed homes but also severed the ties that held communities together. Yet, in the face of devastation, there was a flicker of hope. Fire crews continued to fight valiantly, bulldozing fire breaks and dousing flames with everything they had. The question that lingered: however, was whether it would be enough. As the sun set on yet another day of destruction, the city braced for the unknown. Winds were expected to increase overnight, and fire experts warned that the battle was far from over. For those forced to flee, the uncertainty of what they would find upon their return loomed heavy. Los Angeles was a city under siege, not by an army, but by a force of nature that cared little for wealth, status, or history. The fire was indiscriminate, a relentless enemy that turned the city's iconic skyline into a haunting silhouette against a sea of flames. The battle wasn't over, and as the fire raged on, one thing was clear: this was a fight for survival, for community, and for the soul of a city that refused to be consumed by the darkness. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, the full scope of the devastation came into view. Helicopters circled overhead, capturing aerial footage of neighborhoods that had been reduced to ash. Entire blocks were unrecognizable, blackened debris stretching for miles. The once vibrant communities of Brentwood, Pacific Palisades, and Mandeville Canyon were now wastelands, eerily silent except for the distant crackle of flames and the hum of emergency vehicles. For the thousands who had fled their homes, shelters became the only refuge. In hastily arranged evacuation centers, families sat huddled together, clutching what little they had managed to grab in the chaos. The smell of smoke lingered on their clothes, a haunting reminder of the lives they had left behind. Volunteers bustled around them, offering food, water, and blankets, but the atmosphere was heavy with anxiety. "I can't stop thinking about my dog," said Maria Gonzalez, who had to leave her pet behind when the fire swept through her neighborhood. "The firefighters told us we had minutes to evacuate. I didn't even have time to grab his leash. I just hope he made it out somehow." In one corner of a shelter in Westwood, children sat quietly, their faces pale and drawn. A few clutched stuffed animals, but most stared blankly, still processing the terror of being ripped from their homes in the middle of the night. Their parents whispered in hushed tones, trying to reassure them, but their own uncertainty was impossible to hide. The stories of loss were as varied as the people who told them. A young woman from Malibu tearfully recounted how she had watched her family's house go up in flames from the rearview mirror of her car. An elderly couple from Mandeville Canyon shared how they had been separated during the evacuation, finally reuniting hours later at the shelter. One man, who had been living out of his RV, admitted he had nowhere to go even before the fire took everything he owned. But amid the heartbreak, there were also stories of incredible bravery and resilience. In Brentwood, firefighters worked through the night to save homes perched on the edge of the canyon. Using bulldozers, they cleared dry vegetation to create fire breaks, a desperate attempt to halt the flames before they reached the densely packed neighborhoods below. Aerial teams flew relentlessly, dropping water and fire retardant with pinpoint precision. In some cases, their efforts paid off. Houses at the bottom of the canyon remained untouched, even as the surrounding hills burned. "We're doing everything we can," said Captain Laura Mitchell of the Los Angeles Fire Department. "Our priority is protecting lives, but we're also trying to save as much property as possible. It's a battle we're fighting hour by hour, minute by minute." But the fight was far from over. The infamous Santa Ana winds, known for their ferocity, were expected to pick up again. These winds, gusting at speeds of up to 50 miles per hour, turned the fire into a monster, carrying embers miles away to ignite new blazes. Firefighters described the conditions as a perfect storm: high winds, dry air, and no rain in sight. In Mandeville Canyon, firefighters faced one of their toughest challenges yet. A cluster of homes perched precariously on the hillside was directly in the fire's path. Residents had been evacuated, but firefighters knew that if the flames reached this area, it would spark a domino effect, potentially sending the fire cascading into the city below. For 5 grueling hours, they fought to hold the line. Bulldozers carved out more fire breaks, while firefighters sprayed foam on houses to prevent them from catching fire. The effort was nothing short of heroic, and by morning, the homes remained standing. "We can't save everything, but every house we protect is a victory," said Mitchell, her face streaked with soot and exhaustion. "This is what we signed up for. We'll keep fighting as long as it takes." Even as the flames raged on, the city began to rally together. Across Los Angeles, donation drives sprang up overnight. Churches, schools, and community centers collected food, clothing, and supplies for evacuees. A bar in the East Village organized a massive drive, gathering everything from warm blankets to dog food. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, a testament to the resilience and compassion of the city's residents. But for many, the uncertainty was almost unbearable. In the shelter in Westwood, an evacuee named David Carter sat on a cot, staring at his phone. He had been checking for updates on his neighborhood for hours, hoping to see a sign that his home had been spared. "I keep refreshing the map, looking at the fire line," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I think my house is gone, but until I see it with my own eyes, I can't believe it. I just can't." The fire's impact wasn't limited to the physical destruction it caused. It left emotional scars that would take years to heal. Families who had lost everything now faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from scratch. Insurance claims, FEMA applications, and the sheer logistics of starting over loomed large in their minds. For now, though, the focus was on survival. The firefighters, exhausted but determined, continued their relentless battle against the flames. The evacuees, displaced but hopeful, clung to the belief that they would one day return home. And as the sun set on another day of destruction, Los Angeles braced itself for yet another night of uncertainty. The battle was far from over, but the city's spirit remained unbroken. Nightfall brought a new kind of terror to Los Angeles. The fires, once visible only as distant plumes of smoke during the day, transformed into rivers of flame against the pitch-black sky. The Santa Ana winds, gusting with renewed fury, carried embers across miles, sparking new blazes in areas thought to be safe just hours before. For the residents still within the evacuation zones, every gust of wind brought fresh dread. In Brentwood, the eastern front of the Palisades fire was a battleground. Firefighters worked tirelessly, carving containment lines and dousing flames with water and fire retardant. Helicopters circled above, dropping their loads with precision, but the winds made even the most advanced aerial efforts a gamble. Embers skipped over containment lines, igniting dry brush and threatening homes perched on the ridges. "We're doing everything we can," said firefighter Tony Ramirez, his face streaked with ash as he paused for a moment to catch his breath. "But the fire keeps finding new ways to spread. Every time we think we have it under control, the wind shifts, and we're back to square one." The conditions were nothing short of apocalyptic. Fire crews described the blaze as a living entity, capable of creating its own weather systems. Fire whirls, tornado-like vortexes of flames, danced across the hillsides, pulling oxygen from the air and making the environment almost unbreathable. Smoke blanketed the city, turning day into night and casting an eerie orange glow over everything. In the midst of the chaos, emergency teams made a harrowing decision: to deploy all available resources to save a critical stretch of homes along Mandeville Canyon. This area was not only densely populated but also strategically vital. If the fire breached the canyon, it could spread into the heart of Los Angeles, endangering millions. Residents who had defied evacuation orders now faced the wrath of the firestorm. Among them was John Harper, a retired firefighter who refused to leave his home. "I've been fighting fires my whole life," he said, gripping a garden hose as he soaked the perimeter of his property. "I'm not leaving. This is my home, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it." John's determination mirrored that of the firefighters battling the blaze. Bulldozers worked through the night, clearing dry vegetation, while ground crews sprayed foam on homes in a desperate attempt to prevent them from igniting. Aerial teams dropped flame retardant, painting the hills red in an effort to box in the fire. But the fire was relentless. At 2 a.m., a sudden wind shift caused chaos. Flames roared down the canyon, engulfing trees and brush in seconds. Firefighters scrambled to protect homes, some standing directly in the path of the inferno, using hoses and handheld tools to beat back the flames. The heat was so intense that it melted street signs and cracked the pavement. "We're holding the line," Ramirez shouted over his radio, his voice barely audible above the roar of the fire. "But we need backup. This thing is out of control." Backup arrived in the form of additional aerial units, but the situation remained precarious. The winds made it nearly impossible to predict where the fire would go next. For every home they saved, another seemed to ignite, the flames spreading like an unstoppable wave. Meanwhile, in shelters across the city, evacuees watched the unfolding disaster on their phones and televisions. The tension was palpable. Every update brought a mix of hope and despair. Some saw footage of their homes still standing, while others watched helplessly as the flames consumed everything they owned. One such evacuee, Angela Torres, described the surreal experience of watching her neighborhood burn from a distance. "You feel so powerless," she said, clutching a photo of her children. "You see it on the news, but it doesn't feel real until you see your house go up in flames. And then it hits you, you've lost everything." For Angela and many others, the emotional toll of the fire was almost as devastating as the physical destruction. Families grappled with the uncertainty of whether they would have anything to return to. Children cried themselves to sleep, confused and scared. Elders sat silently, mourning a lifetime of memories reduced to ash. Yet, even in the darkest moments, stories of resilience and heroism emerged. In one shelter, a group of volunteers worked tirelessly to comfort evacuees, providing warm meals and blankets. "We're here to support them," said volunteer coordinator Linda Chen. "They've lost so much, but they're not alone. This community is strong, and we'll get through this together." Back on the front lines, firefighters refused to give up. By dawn, they had managed to hold the line in Mandeville Canyon, saving dozens of homes. The fire continued to rage, but the tireless efforts of the crews had prevented it from spreading into more densely populated areas. "This isn't just about fighting a fire," said Ramirez. "It's about protecting lives, homes, and everything people hold dear. We're not going to let this fire win." As the sun rose over the smoldering hills, the city braced for another day of uncertainty. The battle was far from over, but Los Angeles had shown that even in the face of unimaginable destruction, its people would not back down. The fourth night of the wildfire brought an eerie stillness to Los Angeles. The winds had temporarily subsided, but the city remained on edge. The fire, now larger than the city of San Francisco, had destroyed over 16,000 structures, leaving thousands of families homeless. While firefighters had managed to contain certain areas, new flare-ups threatened to reignite chaos at any moment. The battle was not won, it was a fragile pause in an ongoing war. In the evacuation shelters, tension mixed with exhaustion. Families huddled together, clinging to the hope that their homes might still stand. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke, and the glow of the fires reflected faintly through the windows. Volunteers worked tirelessly to provide meals, distribute blankets, and console those grappling with immense loss. One volunteer, Melissa Nguyen, shared her perspective. "People think it's just about losing a house, but it's so much more than that. It's their memories, their security, their entire world. We're doing what we can, but there's no quick fix for what these families are going through." At the shelter in Brentwood, 8-year-old Emma Hernandez sat with her mother, clutching a stuffed animal she had managed to grab during their frantic evacuation. "We left so fast," Emma said quietly. "I didn't even get to say goodbye to my room." Her mother, Maria, fought back tears. "We don't know if our house is still standing," she admitted. "But what matters is that we're together. Things can be replaced. People can't." Meanwhile, on the front lines, firefighters were gearing up for another critical push. The Santa Ana winds were forecasted to return with renewed intensity, potentially undoing days of progress. Crews worked through the night, digging containment lines and using controlled burns to eliminate fuel for the fire. The strategy was risky but necessary. "This is the hardest fight of my career," admitted Fire Chief Jordan Matthews, addressing his team. "But every house we save, every family we protect, it's worth it. We're not just fighting fire, we're fighting for the people who call this city home." The fire's relentless march brought it dangerously close to critical infrastructure. Power stations and water supply lines were at risk, and officials were forced to make difficult decisions. Rolling blackouts were ordered in several areas to prevent electrical sparks from igniting new fires, leaving thousands without power. Despite the challenges, there were moments of triumph. In Mandeville Canyon, firefighters successfully defended a cluster of homes that had been on the brink of destruction. Aerial teams managed to extinguish a firestorm near Brentwood, halting its advance into one of the city's most populated neighborhoods. Each small victory was hard-fought and celebrated as a testament to the bravery and determination of those on the ground. By dawn, the fire had consumed over 300,000 acres, but containment efforts were holding steady at 40%. For the first time, officials expressed cautious optimism. The winds, though unpredictable, were expected to die down within the next 48 hours, giving firefighters a narrow window to gain the upper hand. In a press conference, Mayor Evelyn Grant addressed the city. "We've faced challenges before, but this fire is unlike anything we've ever seen. Yet, through it all, we've witnessed the strength and resilience of our community. To our firefighters, volunteers, and every single Angelino doing their part, thank you. Together, we will rebuild." Rebuilding, however, would take years. Insurance claims, FEMA aid, and community donations were just the beginning. For those who had lost everything, the road ahead seemed impossibly long. But even in the face of such devastation, there was hope. Across Los Angeles, people opened their homes to evacuees. Donation drives collected food, clothing, and essentials. Strangers became neighbors, and the city banded together in a way that transcended the tragedy. In Brentwood, John Harper, the retired firefighter who had stayed to protect his home, stood on his scorched driveway, surveying the damage. His house had survived, but the surrounding hills were blackened and barren. "We've lost so much," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But we haven't lost who we are. We're fighters. This city, these people, will come back stronger." As the sun rose on the fifth day, smoke still hung in the air, a reminder of the battle that was far from over. But Los Angeles stood tall, united in its resolve. The fire had tested the city in unimaginable ways, but it had also revealed its heart, a heart that refused to be consumed by the flames.